but more times than not, it's just another product. So and it's different with yourself is because your backstory.
Right.
So the film and your books and everything you've done in your life and all the madness compared to what you're doing these days, working with entrepreneurs and charities and your seminars around the world and everything else. That is the hook for them because that's your biography. That's your fingerprint.
So essentially,
you wouldn't be out there saying, I wouldn't put in a press release about for $39.95 you can buy the book of The Wolf of Wall Street
right.
and buy all your products because they sniff it out straight away and they're not going to facilitate flogging product for you.
So when you tell them what you want to push, you're not talking about a product. You're talking about your vision, your backstory,
yeah, and
what the story you have to
why
offer.
You're interesting,
right? Why you're interesting.
Why my readers going to be interested in reading about you?
Right. And interestingly enough, what I found, and I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that when you take that approach with journalists, they start selling stuff for you.
Completely.
They do it. It's like if you don't talk about it, they'll say, well, tell us about these seminars you're
doing.
Can
I promote your website as well? Yeah, no problem.
Right, and that's what happens. So you want to make sure, and then sometimes it doesn't. Like for instance, I actually was on YouTube looking with my partner. We were looking at some old clips and we were just looking for stuff that was on there, and we noticed an interview that you got me. It was in Melbourne on some morning show. And it was it was a really great interview. Like it was just about the GFC.
Yep.
And it was right before we were going to Brisbane.
It's on the ABC, yeah.
Yeah, and my partner never had seen it before. And she watched the whole thing and she was like, I think that's the best interview you ever gave. Yet there wasn't one thing about me giving seminars. There wasn't one thing about anything that would relate someone to my website. So what I'm saying is this, sometimes it's not going to go into selling. In other words,
no.
That was simply, but if you looked at that, you'll say, wow, that guy's an expert in his field. He must be an important guy that everyone wants to see him on the breakfast show. So I guess like each interview serves as a building block.
Correct.
Each article can propel you to the next level.
Correct.
Sometimes it will turn into a situation where you can actually sell. They'll start doing it for you, and other times it won't. Yeah. But either way, it's all good because it's another kind of piece of the puzzle in building your overall brand. So when people either Google you or just search you on YouTube.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if you do some great interviews and you're there just telling your story of what you do, and you're not flogging any products, you're not trying to push anything, or you're only one click away then from people then finding out who you are and your product and your company and everything else. So if someone reads a story about you or sees a fantastic interview and then Googles you, well, they're straight into your company then, and then they can buy a product.
Got it.
But journalists don't. I think consumers as well. I mean, consumers are a lot smarter these days than they were in the past. That people don't like being taken for a ride.
Absolutely. Now, question: when you call up, let's use a radio station for instance, right? If you're going to do a radio spot, and if you were going to, let's say, just not you as a PR agent or just some individual themselves, they were doing this trying to generate their own PR. Who would you call the radio personality themselves? Would you call their assistant? Who would you call at the station?
Oh, just you call the show.
Call the show.
Yeah, and I think monitor the show. I mean, so many shows these days are looking for, especially radio shows, are looking for commentators and content. So if you're an expert in your field and you're a great communicator and you know what you're talking about, well, position yourself to try and get an opportunity, either for being a regular caller or some form of experience. But yeah, contacting the show direct, an executive producer of the show or the producer. And that's probably the best way to start.
Got it. So you would call up the show and ask for either the producer or the executive producer.
Correct.
Yeah. Not so much the radio personality themselves?
No.
Okay. Very important. Okay. So then once you made that initial phone call, would you then try to follow it up with an email or a package?
Yeah. I mean, usually it's hard to explain yourself in an opening call. I mean, if you call an executive producer and they've just finished a 3-hour show and they're trying to prepare for the next show, and you're getting you're cold calling someone and you're trying to explain in the first 15, 30 seconds exactly who you are and why you think that you're semi-important or you can offer something for their show. So I think it's usually to send a letter first, send an email first, then possibly follow up with a call, or a brief call and follow up with an email.
Got it.
But your whole thing about talking about space invaders, people that invade other people's space, that it's something it's crucial not to do. because everyone's busy these days, and people don't like their time being wasted.
Right. And just for all you listen with Space Invaders, our Nick and I had a very funny experience in one of the seminars I was giving in Australia, where a person who was attending my seminar was just got up right in Nick's face, was trying to sell Nick, like, to get me to invest in his product, and he harassed Nick to the point where Nick was like shaking, and then Nick walked away, and then about 15 minutes later, I turned the corner, and there the guy was in my face, right? I was freaked out by the guy. Then 15 minutes later, he hit the promoter down there, and he ended up going through like 5 different people. Well, I give him an A for persistence, but of course, that's invading someone's space bubble. The guy had no shot of getting money or really any reasonable advice from me. So the idea is not to sort of blow it, on the charisma side of things with ineffective body language. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of if you're in person, the body language, and of course over the phone, we all know that the most important thing is not just what you say, it's really the tonality and the enthusiasm. I think it's interesting with I think our first phone call is a great example that when I spoke to you for the first time, I both consciously and unconsciously was extremely enthusiastic. I spoke to you with utter confidence. I said, Nick, let me just tell you what I'm capable of doing here. You have no idea. I'm into this 1,000%. I'm thinking big. My vision is just, boom, boom, all over the world. So, I was aware that in order to essentially hook someone like of your caliber, you didn't want to hear that I wanted to go to Australia, do a speech, and be done with it. You were looking to grow with somebody yourself, right? Yeah. So I was aware of that. So I, instantly came out upbeat, enthusiastic, sharp as a tack. Yeah. Things I teach in persuasion communication. And, without really knowing why, you're like, wow, this is a guy, obviously, if it works out, there's massive potential. Right. I guess the same thing goes with a producer, right? If you're calling on a radio show, if you call up, how you doing? I have this. You have to, it's the way you sound in the first.
Or you send which we'll get into a little bit later. You send a crummy press release, or
right. With grammatical errors and right.
Or you send one that's 10 pages long,
right?
Because we all know, as I said before, everyone's busy. People don't have people have less time on their hands. If they get a press release, they want to be able to read it and in the first 3 or 4 lines know exactly what you're doing, rather than having to trawl through 10 pages.
Let's move on to the third step here, which is now once you've gotten to the point where have got some critical momentum going here, and it's feeding on itself, not a feeding frenzy, so to speak, but you're getting consistent PR. I guess the next step was, as we said, was protecting the brand. And along those lines, now we all know that there is things that happen, as so to speak, shit happens in life, right? And sometimes you're doing everything right, and bam, it just hits you, and there's nothing you can do, and something happens in your business or personally you make an error, right, which has been unintended, and all of a sudden, you start to go into this sort of PR death spiral. We've seen that happen with people because, at least in my country, we love to build people up and then tear them down just as quickly. So I guess a good example right now is one of your fellow countrymen or ex-countrymen, Mel Gibson, who's in a PR spiral right now. But that aside, meaning that, I guess you could say, well, don't get drunk, go out and beat up a woman or curse at a police officer or make racial slurs, and it's probably good advice for someone trying to protect their brand. But
and Mel didn't follow any of those.
And I can't say whether he did it or not, because I don't know. I only know what I read in the press. It's all alleged, right? So I'm not saying he did it or not. But the point is that would fall into the category of self-inflicted abuse.
Correct.
Okay, where it's almost like you're cutting off your own nose, right? So that's one aspect. I think that's pretty obvious. Like don't go out there and make.
And that's personal.
Right, that's personal. Yeah. And then you have the other stuff, which is like I said, is the stuff that you have no control of. Just things happen and boom, you end up suffering some setbacks and the press attacks you. That's another element. But the element I want to focus on right now is what are the things that people do out of almost like not self-destructive nature, but they just don't know better, and they make classic errors when they get successful, and they end up destroying their brand. In other words, whether it's things of like overexposure.
Well, there's overexposure is one. False promises. So whether you send a press release and you say things in your press release that aren't entirely true about your product, or certain research that a lot of percentages and figures these days in press releases, some things are made up, and I think it's being honest. Honesty is key to it. When there's a major problem, get out there and be direct and honest about it straight away. That's the best thing to do. I always say to clients that whenever there's a drama or a situation, be first out with the truth. You never want the media uncovering the truth. So you never want
they
to get
won't
out
stop
and say,
until
no,
they
it's
do,
all
right?
fine, it's all fine. And then something comes out a few days later.
Right.
Get out there and admit whatever's happened straight away. And it's different